Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is GBay99. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Today, we have a video that I am very excited about. This is going to be a video that's going to talk about all my favorite things. We're talking about League of Legends. We're talking about esports. We're talking about business and finance and investing. And I cannot wait to get into it because today we are going to be discussing the big, important, and overarching question: are esports currently in a bubble? A financial bubble that could be about to burst. This question was posed by a person over at Kotaku who wrote an article that I believe was published earlier this week where they asked that question and did quite a bit of reporting, where I'll link that full article in the description down below. But essentially, the article in question suggests that yes, esports could very well be in a bubble, that things are not sustainable where they are, and that it could be about to burst. Now, I'll start off by saying that there's a lot that I kind of find wrong with the article in question. I feel like a lot of the reporting that's done is kind of done in a sense where it's almost as if they're finding a bunch of things that are wrong with a number of different esports and then like taking the worst case facts and scenarios from different games and different leagues all over the place and saying, like, okay, look at all this evidence that esports as a whole might be in trouble, whereas it might not be as bad as things are being made out to be, because typically games and esports and everything are very separated from each other. I don't think that anything that happens in the Overwatch League has really any bearing in what happens in LCS. And similarly, Fortnite is struggling quite a lot with its esports scene right now, but I don't think that has too much bearing on LCS or League of Legends as a whole. So there is a little bit of a worst case scenario painted that might not really be where we are right now. But there are some interesting things that are brought up in the article, which three major points we'll be discussing today. The first is viewership numbers and the legitimacy of pretty much all viewership number reporting that you see that's like given out to the public as, oh, look how big esports is. The second is one of the most interesting things, which or maybe not most, but there's a number of insiders that are quoted in the article that say there are no sustainable revenue models currently in esports, and nobody has any idea what kind of sustainability there is because no one has a good revenue model. And then the third thing is kind of the bubble discussion about currently esports is really being propped up by a lot of venture capital money, and it could vary, if the venture capitalists end up pulling out, then we're kind of stuck in the water. There isn't really anything that's keeping esports afloat other than the venture capitalists at the moment, or at least keeping it afloat at the level that we're currently at. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the viewership numbers. This is something that's kind of interesting, but I'll spend the least amount of time talking about it because I think there's more interesting stuff going on. Firstly, though, viewership is kind of interesting because right now, as the article suggests, there are numbers that are given out that are either exaggerated, untrue, not in like an evil way, but like just not verifiable numbers, or sometimes they're outright being faked. I don't know if any of you guys have ever gone on to Gamepedia. I think Leaguepedia is under the Gamepedia umbrella. And if you go on an article or something and then scroll to the very bottom of the screen, you'll see like a small stream that's being played. Apparently, Gamepedia sells promotion for streams where you can choose to have a stream that's, if you pay them, they'll put your stream in that little corner. And then that's a way that some companies have used to boost viewership numbers for events or something that they're having. And then, they can go around, turn around and say, hey, look how much viewership we had for this event. Look how many people we have tuning in, when it's not really that many people. Most people aren't even watching that because it's in a little thing at the bottom of Gamepedia where you're not actually watching it, right? I believe that's everything the article says, or that's one of the subjects that the article broaches on the topic of viewership, which is kind of interesting. I never realized that, because that's something I see all the time. I use Gamepedia quite a lot. Another thing, though, that's almost more interesting when it comes to the viewership numbers is just that, viewership doesn't really tell a story. When you say that, let's say League of Legends has an LCS event where it gets 200 million viewers or 20 million viewers, whatever number you want to say. It's really easy to look at that and say, oh, wow, we got 700 million viewers for Worlds or whatever big number. That's more than the NBA Finals. That's more than the Super Bowl. But in reality, that's not really something that can be equated, because right now there isn't a good definition of what a view is. Like, is a view, we do have a little bit of distinction, like, oh, maybe we had 99 million unique viewers, where, okay, 99 million people that watched that are all individuals that watched differently from everyone else. Whereas when you look at viewership numbers for traditional sports and for traditional things like the Super Bowl, there's a company, at least in America, there's a company called Nielsen, which has Nielsen families. And just in general, their entire business model is getting super accurate reporting for what people are doing. So what people are buying, what people are watching, what people are, choosing to do. You can sign up actually to be a Nielsen family and do some of the recording yourself if you think that's fun. I had an old teacher actually that did that, statistician teacher, because it's kind of an interesting thing that they'll go out and find like little pockets of America, and they'll get all these different families that have all these different situations, single mother with 3 children, a married couple who are in their 40s with a teenage boy and a baby girl. And like every little demographic is gotten, in theory, they have every demographic under the Nielsen umbrella. And then they'll use those families to see, like, okay, what is it that, young males between the ages of 18 and 34 are consuming? Okay, they aren't consuming cable, they're watching esports or something. But, generally when they record viewership for something like the Super Bowl, they have a more stringent record of what that is. For the Super Bowl or just any television viewership, you have to, I think it's like 6 minutes. Someone has to be watching that event for a full 6 continuous minutes before their view is counted as someone who watched the Super Bowl, which, 6 minutes for the Super Bowl, that's like 4 hours. That's still not too much, but it is a lot more than, okay, let's say LCS has 100,000 viewers at the time of TSM versus CLG. And okay, how many of those 100,000 people are actually watching? How many of those views is just boosted from having the stream embedded on Twitch's front page or embedded on sites like Gamepedia? And how many people, how long are those viewers actually watching? Or unique views, especially when you go and say, oh, Worlds had 300 million unique viewers. How many of those viewers actually sat and watched Worlds? And, what does that mean? Did they watch one bit of group stage? Did they go on Twitch while Worlds was on and saw for a second there was Worlds that, Twitch has that promoted stream thing that they just, they see Worlds for a second and they count as a viewer, even if they never ended up watching more than a total of 12 seconds. There's a lot of questions there, which is kind of interesting, because that is something that's a pretty big discrepancy right now. There isn't really good reporting for the most part. The article mentions that I think Riot in particular has a system that they're trying to get into, or like a system where they're trying to find more accurate data to like measure someone that, generally really watches the thing versus just seeing the stream for a few seconds and then, not being able to distinguish, did they watch it for 10 seconds or did they watch it for 10 hours? But anyway, that's something that's pretty interesting. And it is kind of, currently, or at least in the past, I don't know about today, but we've had a lot of circumstances previously where we've seen Riot, especially because these companies are reporting their own numbers. Riot will come out and say, oh, we had 600 million people watching Worlds, 300 million people watching Worlds. And that might not be true at all. That might not be 300 million unique views. That might not be 300 million people that watched it for more than a minute. That might be a completely inflated number that's giving a highly inflated perception to others, and especially other people that are like investors and stuff, how big esports really is right now, even if it is still very big. So anyway, that was kind of interesting. But again, the viewership angle of this article, I would say, is one of the least interesting parts of it. One of the more interesting things is that apparently, according to the sources at least, there is no successful revenue model that teams are like currently using. Teams are really unsure of how they're going to make money, how they are trying to make money, or how they ever will end up making money. There was I think it says, there's a source that says it's closer. They say that a majority of teams lose money, a majority of teams fail to turn a profit, and then they're pressed like, okay, is that a majority as in 51% of teams are failing to make money, or is that like 90% of teams are failing to turn a profit? And then the source responds, it's like 89% of teams. It's closer to 89% of teams are failing to turn a profit, which if that's true, that's really interesting because firstly, esports has been around for a really long time, but we're starting to get into a point where you would kind of hope, at least with the establishment of franchise leagues like LCS and Overwatch League, with the establishment of Riot doing a much better job of like regulating, all of those stringent requirements that it took to get into the LCS, that it took to actually be allowed to purchase a spot in the LCS, reasons like Immortals, why they weren't accepted because apparently they didn't have good financials and stuff. We're in an era right now where you would think the teams are starting to work towards a successful business model where they're, hopefully having a clear goal in mind for what they want to achieve and a specific path to get there. And to hear that apparently that's not the case, apparently, again, according to the sources, that this isn't something the teams are very confident on at all, is a really interesting thing that's kind of almost scary. Then nobody has a successful revenue model. And this is something also that's kind of interesting because League of Legends is singled out in particular as having players that have super high salaries, players that make a ridiculous amount of money, and they kind of need to have that money to be, you don't want Bjergsen to go and become an influencer. You don't want Bjergsen to quit being the mid laner in TSM and then go and start being a streamer like Dyrus or a streamer like any of the old retired League pros, because those players are those like influencers, the Tyler ones and Yasuo's and stuff, they are making as much, if not more money than pro players are in a lot of circumstances. And you need to pay pros a ridiculous amount of money to keep them as pros and not retiring to be streamers and stuff. I mean, there was way back when Mark Merrill made a comment about Reginald, the owner of TSM. That was his love me some Reggie, but blah, blah, blah comment where he mentioned where I think Reginald at the time was talking about how, players don't get paid enough and there's issues with how Riot was running things. And this was before LCS was franchised. And I think it was a bit of a push to get LCS franchised and everything. But Mark said, if Reggie wants to pay his players more, he has the money to do it. He's super rich. TSM is rich. And Monte Cristo commented on that as the owner or former owner of Renegades. And he said, we're paying players as much as we possibly can. Players' salaries are absolutely huge, and we cannot afford to pay players any more than what we are. It's incredibly important to have really good players on your team. It's incredibly important to pay good salaries, to have good players. That is not something that teams are skimping on. Teams are not, trying to undercut player salaries to try and make a quick buck or save money. Like, there is a huge amount of money that has to be put forward to pay players and keep them on your team and everything. And players are being paid such huge contracts. And on top of just everything else, all the other expenses that are going into all these different leagues in the world, it's difficult to make money. And it's shocking to hear how far away teams are and leagues are from being able to turn a profit. There's one Riot employee that's quoted in this article where I'll read the direct quote for you. I have it written down here. The article says, one Riot employee with knowledge of League of Legends esports revenue, when asked whether the League Champion Series or LCS makes money, laughed and then said its current goal is to prevent it from losing money indefinitely. Which again it's interesting how far away we apparently are from teams having a successful business model and a successful revenue model, because that's something that's super important. I mean, one of the reasons that the NBA and NHL and NFL and like traditional sports leagues, particularly franchise leagues, one of the reasons that franchise leagues work is because everybody makes money. To use the NFL as an example, it would not be a sustainable business model if the New England Patriots and Green Bay Packers and 49ers and teams that have these huge fan bases and tons of success, if they were the only ones that were able to turn a profit because they have such huge fan bases, then okay, that's good for them. But the NFL would not survive if the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals and the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts and all these other teams that have so much less history and who are much worse right now and who are, don't have the huge devoted fan bases because they're small market towns. If they weren't able to make money themselves, then the NFL would not be the sustainable business model that it is. The fact that everybody turns a huge profit and everybody is able to make so much money is the thing that is able to keep it running for such a long period of time. And it's really interesting that esports apparently is so far away from that because, even if there are still the TSMs and maybe C9s who are able to turn a profit, if the lower level teams and the worst of the worst teams are not able to turn a profit, then that does not bode well for esports. So I'm really curious about how, again, one thing I'm curious about with regards to this article is how much of this is true, especially for League of Legends in particular. They end up quoting Complexity Gaming, who I don't know if Complexity has any team in the Overwatch League or if they're a part of any big franchised esports leagues right now, but they're obviously not in League of Legends at the moment. And some of their sources, I don't believe that I know any of their sources that are, big in League of Legends apart from rioters who are quoted. So I'm curious about the League of Legends situation in particular because the idea behind franchise leagues in general are sustainability, building a path towards sustainability. And I'm curious about how close teams are towards that. But anyway, that gets into the last point here, which is maybe the most interesting point of this article, which is venture capitalism and how it's what's really keeping esports going at the level that it is right now. And it kind of calls into question, is this sustainable right now? So for starters, just a quick understanding for anyone who doesn't know what a venture capitalist is, or they're also called angel investors. These are individuals that are investors who will go around and invest in startups, invest in young companies and stuff. And the way that venture capitalists typically view things is they will give exorbitant amounts of money to companies out there, but they're kind of expecting a lot of them to fail. They're expecting to throw, millions and millions of dollars into 30 companies. And they only think one or two of them, they're only hoping that one or two of them end up becoming something really big. But their goal is to find the next really, really big thing. The next thing that's like Uber, the next Pinterest, the next Lyft, the next, thing that's going to blow up and become super successful for them because that's going to be able to pay off all the other failed investments they had and then still turn them a massive profit if they're able to get the next Netflix, the next Amazon thing. That's kind of what a venture capitalist or angel investor is, which is, different from the average investor, obviously. And there's currently a trend, for any of you who don't know, there's currently a huge trend in the business world where venture capitalists are loving to invest in companies that don't make money at all. Like, it's one thing if you want to go and invest in Amazon or Google because you see the potential for what they might become, but even now, or, not now, but even back in the year 2000 or 2001, whatever, Amazon was still turning a profit. They were only selling books online, but they were still turning a profit from selling books. And so a venture capitalist might go and say, okay, I want to invest in this startup because I see the huge potential, but hey, they have some cash flow. They're still generating income. They're generating revenue. But currently that's not something that happens at all. Right now, there is a huge bubble to some extent in stock investing and venture capital investing in general. A lot of people are loving to pump money into things that don't turn a profit because they think there is a huge potential for future success. And there's a few examples I have right here. So Uber is the biggest example, right? Uber is kind of hilarious where, look at this. Uber is valued to be nearly a $7 billion company. They just went public very recently. And currently they're valued at a $7 billion company, but they lose nearly $5 billion every year. So to put that in perspective, Capital One who is a company that makes nearly $6 billion a year, is valued at $42 billion. So they are valued at less than Uber. They are valued as a company to be less valuable than Uber, Capital One, the credit card company that everybody has credit cards for. They're valued less. They are valued less. They are less valuable than Uber in the eyes of investors, even though Uber is burning through money without too much of a belief in. I mean, the current belief out there is that Uber does not really have a super clear path towards sustainability, kind of like League of Legends and everything. And to see why people think Uber is so valuable, obviously you might think, Uber is a super revolutionary thing. It's revolutionizing the taxi industry in general, just, the transportation industry. Of course, it's something that's going to be more valuable than just another credit card company. But to really understand how crazy it is, you got to look at this guy, okay? This guy, his name is Chris Sacca. He has been on Shark Tank for, I think, one season. He was a guest investor, and he was a former venture capitalist. I believe he's retired now. But if you've ever seen him or heard him speak in interviews, one thing that he's kind of known for is being an early investor in Uber. He was one of the first people that got in on the first wave of investing for Uber. And to hear him talk about Uber is really interesting. He's from California. I think he might be from Silicon Valley. But when you hear him talk about Uber, the way that he thinks Uber is going to go is he thinks Uber is going to abolish personal car ownership. Like, the way that he thinks Uber is going is he thinks Uber is eventually going to be the thing that everybody uses for transportation, and that ride sharing is going to be the thing that kills personal transportation in general. That nobody's going to have a car because they're going to Uber everywhere. That's where a venture capitalist sees Uber going, and that's why Uber is valued so highly. And that's kind of insane, right? That's insane to think that nobody's going to have a car anymore because everybody's going to be using Uber. But that's the way that venture capitalists view things, and that's why they pump huge amounts of money into stuff like Uber and don't pump money into companies that generate $6 billion a year in profit. And to look at some other examples, there is Lyft, which similarly is a company that just went public recently, and you can see how awful things have been going for Lyft. They are valued at $17 billion. Used to be valued a lot higher. They're valued at $17 billion, even though they lose like $2 billion a year. Pinterest also went public recently. They're valued at $13 billion, even though they lose about $51 million every year. Tesla might be one of the best classic examples of this. Tesla has been, they've been on a pretty steep decline recently, losing like half their valuation, but they are valued at $35 billion now, even after losing all this valuation recently because of all the craziness that's been going on with them. They're valued at $35 billion, even though they lose $1 billion a year. Ford, by comparison, has a very similar valuation. They are also an automobile seller, and they generate $3 billion in profit every year, whereas Tesla loses $1 billion. And these are the same companies in the eyes of investors. These are valued the same in the eyes of investors. That is something that is kind of hilarious, and it's kind of crazy and kind of ridiculous and shocking. And this is kind of, again, this is how just venture capitalism works. This is how people view making angel investments. Is the reason that Tesla is so valuable compared to Ford is because even if they're losing $1 billion a year, people are banking that, hey, electric cars are going to be the thing. They're going to need to be the thing. We're going to run out of oil. We're not going to be going on gas-driven cars in 50 years from now. And Tesla seems to be the forerunner, right? Tesla seems to be the company that's going to be pushing everything forward like that. So that's the kind of thing that gets people so hyped up about companies that lose so much money. But at the end of the day, they are still companies that are losing money, and they need to find a path to profitability. And that's where we got to get back to League of Legends here. So esports is viewed as the same way. People are still viewing like Overwatch. Overwatch League might end up failing, and it might end up just doing nothing but losing money for everybody that invests in it. But the idea is, what if it turns into the next NBA or the next NFL, because an NBA team is like $2 billion. An NBA team is worth billions of dollars. And if you were to buy into the Overwatch League for however much it is, like $60 million or whatever to buy an Overwatch League slot, or if you were to buy an Overwatch team, and I think there was a number floating around in the article somewhere that said like $300 million is around what teams are being valued at right now, an esports team. If you were to buy an esports team for $300 million and then turn that into something that, as Overwatch theoretically grows into the next NBA, the next NFL, you could then sell that team for billions of dollars, even though you bought it for millions. And that's the idea, is that, you know, you get into this for the millions to sell for the billions. Now, that what that means right now for esports is that we have a ton of money that's flowing in from venture capitalists. You see this all the time with articles and stuff that are saying, oh, Eric or A-Rod or Derek Jeter or Michael Jordan, or, you know, these great huge superstars from previous sports and stuff, they're investing in all these different esports teams. The Houston Rockets are buying Clutch Gaming, and they're selling part of Clutch Gaming to the 76ers, who are going to rebrand Clutch Gaming as Dignitas, right? You see all these big names jumping into esports in the hopes that it grows, into, oh, thunder. It's okay, Lucy. Don't get scared. You see all this money coming in that's blowing up esports, and all these leagues are getting this huge amount of money that people are hoping turns it into this big thing. Sorry, the thunder kind of distracted me for a moment. But the problem is that there isn't much coming out yet, right? Again, teams do not have a path to profitability, apparently, and most teams lose just tons and tons of money. But there are a few things that are going for esports teams. One thing being that, you know, esports is super valuable in the sense that there's a chance that you can capture the most profitable demographic of people that advertisers love. Young men between the ages of 18 and 34 is like the holy grail in advertising. People love young men between 18 and 34. That's like, you know, those are the people that go and buy Funko Pops. Those are the people that have hobbies that are just buying things. Those are the people that buy a $2,000 gaming PC, or they like to build their own gaming PCs and consistently upgrade them every 3 months with hundreds and hundreds of dollars of electronic equipment, and buy fancy mechanical keyboards and buy all this crazy stuff, right? Those are very, very profitable parts of the world that people love to go after in terms of advertisers, right? And that's one of the reasons that esports is still being seen as a valuable thing, even though there is so many teams that are just losing money hand over fist. But even in all this circumstance, there is still another thing that esports kind of has going for it, and it's comparable to some of these other angel investments. So right now, there's a couple of things here. We'll go back to this slide for a second. If we look at Uber here, one of the metrics that's used to value companies is price to earnings, which is, in theory, if your company is making money, the value of the company compared to the profit that it turns. That ratio is something that people love to value companies on. But another one, if your company isn't making money, is price to sales. And the price to sales ratio, or the price to revenue, because sales is revenue, even if you're not selling something, the price to the revenue, that ratio is something that a lot of people will look at in terms of trying to see how valuable a business is. And then if you compare some of these companies out there, if you compare Uber has a price to sales of about 8 to 9. Some other ones out there, you have Lyft. They have a price to sales of about 6 to 7. Pinterest has a price to sales of 15. Even Microsoft, which is a huge technology company, obviously, Microsoft has a price to sales of somewhere around 8. And League of Legends teams, or again, just esports teams in general, if they're valued around $300 million, and again, we don't really know how true these numbers are, but the article sources say that you can maybe say there's about an average of $300 million valuation for an esports team. And you can say there's probably about $25 million that the team generates in revenue every month, or every year, excuse me. And with a $25 million revenue, with a $300 million price point, valuation point, that means the price to sales for most esports teams is around 12, which is a little bit on the high side, but it's not too crazy or anything, especially compared to some of these other companies and these other things out there that you see people giving money to in the same sort of way. And so anyway, what all of this really means is, again, things might be a little, this article might not have super solid numbers. Teams might not really be worth exactly $300 million. They might not have exactly $25 million a year in revenue. But if things are kind of true, if that's like not too far off from the truth, right now, esports teams are kind of not that much more different than Uber. They aren't really that much more different than Lyft and Pinterest and all these other kinds of angel investment things. So in general, we could be in a bubble, but it's probably not really in a dire situation right now. And to be honest, if we're in a bubble, that bubble goes beyond esports. I don't think that we're in a bubble for esports that's like specific to esports. If we see venture capitalists pull out, if we see a burst in the financial situation, then that's going to be because venture capitalists as a whole stop betting on companies that lose money. If you see investors no longer backing the Ubers and the Lyfts and the Teslas and the companies that lose a ton of money but have some potential to be a giant behemoth like Netflix or Amazon in the future, if you see that, then that would mean that League of Legends, they're in the same boat as those other companies. Then, that's exactly where esports are right now. They're another risky gamble that venture capitalists are going after in the hopes that it becomes the next NFL. And it could happen, it could happen. And people still have confidence the way they have confidence in Uber and everything. But yeah, so I guess to summarize, the situation we're in right now is we could be in a bubble, but if we are, that bubble goes way beyond esports. And it could be something that affects the broader market in general too. I mean, not to spell doom and gloom, but this is something that touches a lot of different industries. I don't know if it could affect the average person the way that the housing bubble that burst in 2008 affected virtually everybody on the planet, but this is something that has broader reaching consequences beyond esports, in my opinion, if we are in a sort of bubble and that it does eventually burst in the future and venture capitalists stop giving money to companies that just lose money all the time. Like, I don't know if that's going to happen. And if it ever does, yeah, esports would probably be hurt pretty hard, but that everybody would be hurt pretty hard, and this likely isn't a bubble for just esports alone. But anyway, that is my video. I hope you guys all enjoyed watching it. This was quite a long one, but I had a lot of fun making it. Leave a comment. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this, because I love talking business with you guys, and I hope you did not get bored. Either way, though, I will be back with another video in another day or so, but until next time, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.